And it's funny you say that, because there is this kind of tension between wanting the celebrities to have this kind of excellence and, you know, have this kind of example to aspire to, and then having David Seymour come in and completely disrupt all of that with his twerking. So yeah, I think it's such an interesting dynamic to watch.
The dismay of the judges was obvious as Susie Cato was eliminated while David Seymour stays on. Neil,
yes.
Is he benefiting politically? Because Michael Laws came on with this saying Dancing with the Stars gave him immense visibility. But even if David Seymour isn't dancing on our time, he is obviously fully stretched. So is the joke also wearing thin now, do you think?
I think it's really interesting, because I've always referred to David Seymour as the Dr. Sheldon Cooper of New Zealand politics. He's a character from the Big Bang Theory, so he's kind of brilliant, but yeah, just a little bit awkward, and twerking makes it even more awkward. I haven't even seen the footage, and I'm already upset about it. But I was working in Parliament when Rodney Hyde was doing dances.
Oh, that's right,
So you know, ACT leaders have a poor track record in this particular event, and we used to joke in the bar in a 3.2 in Parliament that, you know, ACT was using their robo-dialer, you know, the machine that just sends out all these calls at election time. They were using it to vote for Rodney Hyde to keep him on, because he was actually probably even objectively worse than David Seymour. And so it's this bizarre thing about party political leaders thinking, well, any publicity is good publicity, but it's like, well, yeah, but is someone going to listen to your tax policy more seriously when they've seen your bum waving around? It's like, no. So yeah, I think it's a bold move, and I guess, you know, he got to the stage after the last election when the result was even worse than expected for ACT, that, you know, they're going to try anything, and it didn't work last time for Rodney. Their caucus basically halved afterwards, but maybe it'll have a different result for David Seymour. But yeah, it's the amount of coverage that it's getting is phenomenal.
Before we go, the father of the autistic man mauled by two Rottweilers in Winton on Sunday has rejected claims that his son provoked the attack by entering the property. And the Otago Daily Times is reporting video of the attack, which seems to suggest the dogs may have been on the road outside when they bit 22-year-old Oliver Beaumont. So these dogs have been impounded while investigations underway. What would you do with these dogs? The owners say they're lovely dogs, protectors of their family, quote, "They are forever friends." Be that as it may, what would you do with them?
What can you do with dogs in this circumstance? I mean, the obvious leap is to, you know, have the dogs put down from the victim's perspective, but from the owner's perspective, that's another member of their family. So it is a really, really kind of fickle tension that, you know, it doesn't really pose any immediate solutions.
Okay, it doesn't present any immediate solutions. Interesting problem though, Neil.
Yeah, I think the issue here is if they have any track record of aggressive behaviour, you know, on or off the property, then there's a case that, you know, something serious should be done. But if this was just a one-off, and particularly if it was on the property that they were protecting, then they should probably be given another chance.
We shall see. Neil Miller's been on the panel today. Thank you, Neil.
Always a pleasure.
And thank you for your personal disclosures too. That was that was interesting, and it was good to hear. Miriama Awake, kia ora, thank you.
Kia ora, thank you for having me.
And we are back tomorrow with another panel. Thank you everybody as well, and Checkpoint coming up.
Kia ora, good evening and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Rowan Quinn in for John Campbell. Tonight on the programme, historic scenes in Singapore as US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un emerge from their meeting. In the past few minutes, Mr. Trump has described it as going even better than anyone could have expected. Farmers in flood-hit Tolaga Bay consider legal action against forestry companies for the damage caused by runaway slash. Also tonight, why the Department of Conservation withheld information due to be released in an official information request after consulting with security firm Thompson & Clark. And the Prime Minister announces her new Chief Science Advisor, and a Hamilton dentist calls for dental visits to be subsidised.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in aho. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un have become the first sitting US president and North Korean leader to meet, an unprecedented development after a year of exchanging threats. The agenda at the summit in Singapore includes diffusing tensions and nuclear disarmament. The two leaders held a 41-minute one-on-one meeting, then went into wider talks attended by their top officials. That meeting has finished earlier than expected. Mr. Trump says they've made a lot of progress and the two sides expect to sign an agreement, but he gave no details. The BBC's Rupert Wingfield-Hayes says despite the result of this meeting, both leaders will have to break down decades of distrust in their countries.
We sort of have known for a long time what the outline of any agreement between these two countries would be: denuclearisation in return for security guarantees, recognition, peace treaty and economic assistance. That's been on the table for at least 30 years. But there is massive distrust, particularly on the part of the North Korean leadership. It believes, rightly or wrongly, it believes the United States wants regime change, wants to get rid of the Kim regime, and in the end wants to get rid of the existence of North Korea and have a reunified Korean peninsula under the Republic of Korea in the south.
Rupert Wingfield-Hayes in Singapore. The bad weather in the Gisborne region is easing, but people are bracing themselves for another burst of heavy rain. A number of state highways are still closed and about 750 properties are still without power. Eastland Network says some people should be prepared to be without it overnight. Sarah Robson has the details.
Civil Defence in Gisborne says the rain has eased and river levels have stabilised. But the already sodden region is preparing for more rain overnight. Civil Defence says people living in the Waituhi area might want to spend the night in town to be safe. Farmers are also being urged not to move stock or work in the floodwaters. State Highway 5 between Napier and Taupo will remain closed overnight as crews work to clear slips and debris. State Highway 2 is closed at Te Karaka north of Gisborne because of flooding. Te Karaka is cut off and residents are being asked not to flush their toilets because flooding is affecting the sewerage system. In the South Island, State Highway 70 from Mount Lyford to Peketa is shut. Heavy rain has also closed State Highway 1 north and south of Kaikoura. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
North of Gisborne, a farmer in Tolaga Bay says the logging industry behaves like it's operating in the Wild West. Farmers in the area hit by flooding a week ago are considering legal action against 3 forestry companies for the damage caused by a torrent of logging debris sweeping over their properties. Grant Dumbbell says the Gisborne District Council has failed to ensure the loggers are following the rules.
I mean, this is just the Wild West. Ultimately, these roads lead back to council. Because they are the statutory authority that is required to put those resource consents in place, they're also the statutory authority that is required to monitor those consents. Why do they need an investigation? They should already know this.
Tolaga Bay farmer Grant Dumbbell. The coalition government is in damage control over its 3 strikes debacle, with both sides trying to play down any disagreement. The Justice Minister Andrew Little has had to drop his plans to repeal the law, saying New Zealand First changed its mind about supporting him. New Zealand First's leader Winston Peters says his party has only ever had one position, but he declined to comment about his party's previous conversations on the topic with Mr Little.
Look, well, I've got a lot of confidence in Andrew Little in terms of his reform capacity when it comes to the justice portfolio, which is seriously in need of reform. And we're back him to the hilt. I'm not going to get into a scrap on a petty little sideshow like this.
Winston Peters. Hospital buildings, 2 stadiums and more than half a dozen apartment blocks in Auckland have been found with cladding similar to that in the Grenfell Tower in London, which was wrecked by fire a year ago. The Auckland Council issued a list today of more than 120 buildings with aluminium composite panel. 25 have the most combustible Grenfell Tower type of panel. In 53 buildings, it's not certain what was used, so they're being treated as if they have the most combustible type. The Council's General Manager of Building Consents, Ian McCormick, says all the buildings are safe.
We've found that out of the 116 buildings that we've done to date, that none of those buildings have been found to be dangerous or unsafe as a result of the presence of aluminium composite panel in their external envelope.
Auckland Council's Ian McCormick. A Central North Island Regional Council has ordered the Defence Force to stop discharging stormwater with firefighting foam in it. The Manawatu Whanganui Regional Council has issued the Defence Force with an abatement notice, saying it can no longer put water that contains firefighting foam, which may contain toxins, down stormwater drains. The Defence Force is required to show the Council what steps it's taking to comply with the ban by next month. However, the Defence Force says it stopped training with firefighting foams at all of its bases in 2016. And it is not using a polluting foam, which has been the subject of concern since 2002. It's 5:05. Sport. The coach of the New Zealand women's football team, labelled delusional by one of his former players, has apologised to outraged fans but is standing by his tactics. There have been calls for Andreas Heref to step down immediately after taking an ultra-defensive approach in Sunday's 3-1 loss to Japan in Wellington. Heref has also questioned the side's ability to compete at the top level. The former football fern Abby Urseg, who's retired from international play earlier this year, said the comments showed Heref's delusional state of mind. Heref, an Austrian, now says he didn't explain himself properly.
When I said we will never compete with a team like Japan, I didn't mean that we will never be able to beat them. I meant that we will never have maybe the same technical skills like a Japanese team or like Brazilian teams. But I'm convinced, and that's why I'm here. I know that we can compete and we can win against these teams.
Andreas Heref. 3 big-name New Zealand forwards have retired from International Rugby League, leaving gaping holes to fill for this month's test against England in Denver. Simon Mannering, Ben Matalino and Russell Packer have all announced their calling time on their international careers. Mannering, the 4th most capped Kiwi in the history of the game, says he made the decision to retire after last year's failed World Cup campaign, as he feels he can no longer keep up with the demands of top-level league.
Not getting any younger, and we've got a really good bunch of kids coming through, and I don't think I can really match it with them these days in that arena.
Simon Mannering, that's the news.
Flooding in Gisborne.
But really, I'm just watching a huge tree float down the river as we speak. It's quite an amazing sight.
Logging debris causing more chaos.
It's a bit like hearing a 747 take off, just a massive noise, and then everything just explodes.
The Justice Minister still keen to repeal the 3 strikes law.
It's an absolutely absurd law. It is the high watermark of policy stupidity.
But the PM says it's a no-go.
Who's right?
Well, they're not entirely inconsistent. New Zealand First don't want to entertain
on the table or not.
It's not being entertained now.
Serving up the news. Morning Report with Guy Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, from nuclear standoff to historic summit, from threats to flattery, a former top-level US official gives us his take on that meeting. And after 10, an Australian aviatrix's historic flight and the crime of passion that overshadowed it. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather now through to midnight tomorrow, and severe weather is affecting many areas. Keep an eye on the warnings and watches. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, occasional showers easing this evening. Bay of Plenty, rain with heavy falls, easing to showers this evening, severe gales until evening. Waikato to the Kapiti coast, including the central high country, periods of rain, possibly heavy, easing tomorrow evening. Southeast winds, severe gale in exposed places, easing this evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington and Marlborough, rain with heavy falls, easing north of Wairarapa this evening and elsewhere late tomorrow. Southeast winds, gale in exposed places, easing tonight. Canterbury, occasional rain or drizzle. Nelson and Buller, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow. Southeast winds, gale in exposed places, easing tonight. Westland and Fiordland, fine with high cloud. Otago and Southland, areas of cloud, drizzle about North Otago, spreading to Dunedin and Clutha tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy with rain developing tomorrow. It's 9 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you, Katrina. To Singapore now, where a historic summit's underway after decades of hostilities between the US and North Korea. President Trump and the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un shook hands and smiled against a backdrop of North Korean and US flags before going into one-on-one discussions in the library of a 5-star hotel on Sentosa Island. They then entered wider talks, also attended by their top senior advisors and officials, to discuss the wide range of issues that divide them. The two leaders have just emerged and are walking through the hotel gardens, after which Mr. Trump says they plan to sign something something, although it's not yet clear what exactly that is. Our foreign editor Graham Acton reports.
The summit seemed inconceivable a few months ago as Supreme Leader Kim was warning the US that the nuclear button was always on his desk and President Trump was threatening North Korea with fire and fury. Today, the pair discussed North Korea's denuclearisation in exchange for relief from sanctions. Kim Jong-un seemed positive going into the meeting.
While there was a lot we did to get here, the past felt like fetters on our limbs, and the old prejudices and practices worked as obstacles on our way forward. But we overcame all of them, and we are here today.
President Trump also seemed upbeat, predicting a great relationship with the North Korean leader.
I feel really great. We're going to have a great discussion, and I think tremendous success. It'll be tremendously successful. And it's my honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt.
The leaders then retired to a meeting room with chief advisers, among them US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who hinted before the meeting that the US would come to the table today with some new options for North Korea. But he's also been very clear on the US bottom line.
In light of how many flimsy agreements the United States has made in previous years, this president will ensure that no potential agreement will fail to adequately address the North Korean threat. The ultimate objective we seek from diplomacy with North Korea has not changed. The complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korea Peninsula is the only outcome that the United States will accept.
Robert Asen is a professor of strategic studies at Victoria University. He says the meeting has brought a major PR boost to Chairman Kim.
Kim got a positive outcome simply by the handshake, and that was an achievement. It may not sound like much, but because of North Korea's diplomatic isolation and the fact the United States has not had a normal diplomatic relationship with North Korea and still regards North Korea effectively in a state of war with South Korea, that itself is a Kim can go back to North Korea and say he has achieved something simply because he got the US president to meet with him.
Joel Witt is a senior fellow at the US Korea Institute in Washington. He warns that expectations about a solution to the North Korea issue need to be damped down.
You know, this is a first meeting between the United States and North Korea in years, and the relationship has gotten very bad. That's very obvious to everyone. So we shouldn't expect miracles coming out of an initial meeting. It may take a number of meetings stretching out over some time to work out some of the issues we'd like to start working out.
None of this will be easy to achieve, but North Korea's statements have made it clear that Kim Jong-un is ready to shift focus from nuclear weapons to the economy. It still remains to be seen how far North Korea is willing to go in offering to give up nuclear weapons in exchange for easing of sanctions. But the first Trump-Kim summit gives both sides a chance to test the intentions of the other and see if they can find common ground to work out a way to end their decades-long standoff. Ko Graham Acton, Tēnei.
And CNN's Asia-Pacific editor Andrew Stevens is in Singapore. We spoke to him just before the two leaders emerged a short time ago.
It's been just an extraordinary morning, a moment of history, truly a moment of history. The first time a sitting US president has met a leader of North Korea. And given the background, and it's only just a few short months ago that these two were trading vicious insults, that there was talk of military action on the Korean Peninsula. The North Koreans had launched a ballistic missile as late as last November. So it gives you an idea to go from that in just a few short months to Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting each other and shaking each other's hand. In fact, that handshake went on for about 10 seconds or so, and the experts here in Singapore are watching everything minutely, declaring that the body language was warm. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un sat down briefly and took a couple of questions. Donald Trump was asked what was it like to be there and to be in that moment, and he said, it feels great. He said it was an honour to meet Kim Jong-un. He certainly raised a few eyebrows and said that he was looking forward to a terrific relationship with him. Kim Jong-un, through a translator, said that there had been a lot of obstacles put in the path of this meeting, but they had overcome them all, to which Donald Trump sort of raised his thumb. So it gives you an idea of, it's almost a surreal atmosphere surrounding this complete turnaround in relations between these two. Right now, they are in a bigger meeting that the two leaders had a 45-minute one-on-one meeting. The only others in the room were translators. That has now been expanded. So Donald Trump has brought in Mike Pompeo, his Secretary of State, John Bolton, his National Security Advisor, John Kelly, his Chief of Staff, Kim Jong-un has also brought his people in. So now they are hammering out the details. And the devil in this will be in the details, no doubt. There is a lot that the US expects of North Korea, and there's a lot that North Korea wants from the US. So we're right at the beginning, as this administration has made very clear, they've tamped down expectations on what we can expect to get out of this. And as Donald Trump has been saying, this is the first step in a long process.
And Mr Trump had also said that he'll know in that first minute of the meeting whether things are going to go well, and there was a very convivial start to things. Can we read much into that kind of nice chit-chat and rapport that they seem to have at the start of the meeting?
Well, normally you'd probably say no, but Donald Trump is such an unusual character when it comes to relationships and the importance that he places on relationships. And he seems to be, and he seems to have made it quite clear that he's approaching this meeting and has approached this meeting and this whole issue from very much virtually a businessman's point of view. I will back my own judgment, my own intuition. I will make a decision on whether we can do business with this man. There are 1,001 very, very wise people on North Korean policy in Washington. They would have given him a meticulous briefing had he wanted it, and he made it fairly clear he didn't. He said he's been preparing for it all his life. So normally you would say, oh, they were just the pleasantries. Get them out of the way and get on to the real meat of the matter. But in this case, that personal chemistry matters. It also matters to Kim Jong-un. It matters to the North Koreans. They want to know that they can deal with someone like Donald Trump, who, as we all know, is very mercurial. Whether Kim Jong-un feels comfortable enough basically to put the future of denuclearization in Donald Trump's hands. He also knows that Donald Trump has a finite time in office. Kim Jong-un has maybe 50 years in office. So it's a fine balance. But yes, you're right in that personal chemistry matters much more in this than it would in many other sort of geopolitical meetings at this level.
And in terms of the sort of two talks, the one-on-one ones and then the ones with all the groups of officials and other people that are involved, what's likely to sort of be the division of labour, I guess, in terms of what's worked out in each set of talks?
Well, everything's interwoven at the moment. So the issues are, at the moment, is what will the US get out of this summit? What will Donald Trump be able to walk away with? Will he have an agreement, which is what most pragmatists and analysts would say has to happen? There has to be a signature on a piece of paper from North Korea saying we agree to a step-by-step process towards denuclearization. The overarching goal of the Americans, which was underlined yet again by the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, yesterday, is CVID, complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization. Verifiable obviously means there has to be independent checks on what the North Koreans are doing. Irreversible means that they can't then turn around and sort of resurrect their nuclear apparatus to bring it back to what it was before. That's what the Americans want. The Koreans want safety assurances above everything, security assurances. They want to know that if they actually go ahead with this, if they are serious, and this is still an if at the moment because we've had false storms before, if they are serious, can America provide them with the sort of security guarantee they want? What are those security guarantees? Does it mean withdrawing 30,000 troops from the US troops from the Korean Peninsula? What else does it mean? Mike Pompeo has said that they have unique and different solutions to these questions. We don't know what they are. They're being discussed right now as we speak. The other issue is economics. How does North Korea get sanctions lifted? How does it normalise relations with the US? Does it look at a diplomatic path and a possible embassy in Pyongyang? All those sorts of issues. Now, these are going to be divided up between the teams. And interestingly enough, Mike Pompeo, yesterday at his press conference, went very hard on the fact that the administration did have enough expertise to do this, because there has been, to your point, criticism about the level of expertise in the US administration.
And that's CNN's Asia Pacific editor Andrew Stevens talking to us there from Singapore. Farmers in flood-hit Tolaga Bay are considering legal action against forestry companies for the damage done to their stock and properties by runaway slash. They say the companies that left logs and slash in their forests to be washed away by floodwaters last week are not taking responsibility. It's been a week since flash flooding hit the area, and heavy rain last night caused more water and logging debris to be washed over roads and farms. Our reporter Anusha Bradley and videographer Rebecca Parsons-King have spent the day in Tolaga Bay.
It was a long, sleepless night for Mike and Bridget Parker, as heavy rain brought the threat of more flooding to their already sodden farm.
We had a very long night, not much sleep, had a huge amount of wind, we had another sort of 50 odd mils of rain last night, and yeah, the rivers come up seriously quickly once again, and we just oh well, here we go again, really, watching all the logs come down the river. And basically we found out that what's happened is we've had debris dams up 3 of the tributaries here that have actually built up hugely, let go like a 747 racing off the tarmac.
They're now facing damages of at least $600,000 after fences, paddocks and crops were damaged by last week's flood. The 3 major forestry companies invited affected farmers to a meeting last night.
This only happened because of Forestry's logs. And at the meeting last night, the heads of the whole 3 forestry companies involved, Olson's, Earnslaw and Hikarangi Forest Farm, said that they will only be paying out if their insurance can prove that they have been negligent in the forest. They have absolutely no social conscience whatsoever, and they have no intention of bringing forestry staff down here to help poor people like this lift up their fences, get logs off their property and get silt out of their homes. They are not going to come unless they can be proven to be negligent, and we think it is absolutely disgusting.
The public and media were not allowed into last night's meeting, and Mike Parker says farmers left feeling disillusioned.
They made no decisions, committed to absolutely nothing. They'd had a week to, they knew what they were in for, and we just went round and round in circles. It was basically a circus, really. We came out of there, we sort of had to say, well, okay guys, where to from now? We asked that question several times, and we said, okay, go away, talk to your owners that are overseas and wherever, and come back to us next week.
Up the road, landowners and ecologists Marie McKenty and Grant Dumbbell are planting their own forestry block. They believe the big logging companies are not following the rules and the council is not policing them.
The logging here has been done, this is just the Wild West. This is just bulldozing debris aside. This isn't slash, this is logging debris. This has just been bulldozed into heaps, into piles, into stream valleys, and just left in one hell of a mess. This is just get in and get out for the lowest cost, maximise profit. They can't increase revenue because the market will only pay. The only way they can make more money is reduce costs. So they screw the contractors and then they try and reduce costs by getting away with minimal compliance. And this is the result of it. Ultimately, these roads lead back to council. We heard council say the other day that they're going to undertake an investigation on whether or not these forestry companies are undertaking their logging practices according to their consent conditions. I asked the council, why do they need an investigation? Because they are the statutory authority that is required to put those resource consents in place. They're also the statutory authority that is required to monitor those consents. Why do they need an investigation? They should already know this.
Their neighbour, Paroa Station, lost 300 sheep in last week's flood. Its manager Mike Atkins says they're still waiting on the go-ahead from PF Olson, who leases the land, before they can clean up.
We're just waiting for a decision from the Olson's Forestry, because I was told just to leave it, because a lot of the logs have come out of Olson's Forestry, which is Paro land, but they've got the lease of it. So we were told last week not to touch it. We can't leave it too long.
Meanwhile, back at the Parkers, their son Toby is not sure if there's much of a future farming here.
It's a bit scary, especially if you're, looking at going to the bank and wanting to borrow millions of dollars, and you've got a river that's coming through your house. Like, this hasn't happened for 30 years, and we haven't had. Well, last time it happened, there was 900 mils that fell in 3 days. We've only had a couple of hundred mils, and the water levels come even higher. So, to me, it's something else has made that happen, and if you can't guarantee that that's not going to happen, then it's pretty unsettling.
36 farms in the area have been affected by flooding over the past week. They want the logging companies to put up $100 million to clean up the mess and a halt to all logging activity while a government inquiry into the industry is carried out. In Tolaga Bay for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
So who should pay for the clean-up? There are 3 forestry owners harvesting in the area: Hikurangi, PF Olsen and Earnslaw 1. Peter Weir is the Environment Manager for Earnslaw 1. He's also the President of the Forest Owners Association.
I can understand they're upset. Those criticisms would sound very harsh. We've done issues like we have offered housing to people that are dislocated. We're offering our counselling service to such people. We would love to get down with our machinery out of the forest to help with the clean-up, but there is a couple of large holes in the District Council road where landslides have come down on farms. So we can't even get into our forest, and we can't get machinery out to help until the District Council road is repaired back through those farms. Separately, we've got 2 machines collectively. The forestry companies from Gisborne and from upslope of Tolaga Bay have 3 machines cleaning up the beach. Farmers don't want our heavy machinery on their paddocks because the paddocks are sodden, and we can absolutely understand that. Who wants a 40-tonne excavator and 20-tonne dump trucks running through a paddock? We would just make a huge mess. So we all collectively have to take a breath and wait till this dries out a bit.
Well, they don't want the heavy machinery, but what they do want is money, $100 million worth. Will the forestry companies come to the party to help them pay for the damage and the clean-up?
Well, this is the first I've heard of that request. Our company, Earnslaw 1, has committed to make 2 excavators available for as long as it takes to do the clean-up. But as I say, we have to wait for the sun to come out and the paddocks to dry out a bit before we can do that. We'll bring extra machines in from Gisborne if we have to, if we can't get the stuff out of our forest.
As a man who knows forestry, knows the land, do you think that that $100 million figure might be roughly right for the amount of damage caused in the area?
Look, I have no idea where that number's come from, so I really can't comment on that. First I've heard of it.
The farmers are also saying that they're considering legal action against the forestry companies. Is that something that you would be prepared to fight?
Well, under the Resource Management Act, our company just had a complete audit in our forest 8 weeks ago, a 2-day audit. There were no issues raised. So if it's breaches of the Resource Management Act, I'm not really seeing the grounds for such things. Look, I fully understand emotions are running high. We're absolutely committed to do our bit, our fair share, to help with the clean-up downstream of our forest. Not putting quantums on it, but we do have to wait for the sun to come out.
What do the forestry owners need to do to satisfy that resource consent in terms of preventing damage like this?
Our harvesting resource consent required us to put slash traps in streams. I should point out, we finished harvesting up there 3 to 4 years ago. We've replanted our crop, and in places we've lost our crop's sort of Christmas tree sized height. But anyway, we continue to maintain and clear those debris traps for about 4 or 5 years after harvest for anything that does come through. Our slash traps, our woody debris traps, were completely overwhelmed and ripped out. This was a big event. This was bigger than Cyclone Bowler, but incredibly localised in one catchment. We have another forest only 15 kilometres away in exactly the same state, with no damage in it whatsoever because it didn't get the rain. We've had a huge burst of rain, very, very localised, which has hammered our forest. I really can't speak. I haven't seen what's happened to our neighbours' forest, but I understand there's storm damage in all 3 of them. This was Milford Sound-style rain, 2 inches an hour for a number of hours. on the most erodible country in New Zealand, and it literally fell apart. This was a repeat of Cyclone Bowler, but very localised.
So if your company was doing everything that was required under council rules to prevent this happening, do you think that there needs to be a change to those rules? Because it obviously didn't work, did it? All this slash came down anyway and did a lot of damage to property and stock.
Listen, I believe this is sort of a Berlin Wall comes down moment. I think there will probably be an inquiry and there will probably be significant changes. That said, 1st of May this year, a new raft of changes came in under the Resource Management Act, which lifts the bar, makes it a lot more onerous, creates new rules for harvesting, creates new rules for working around streams. Of course, this new suite of rules hasn't been tested, and it certainly didn't apply to harvesting that was done 5 years ago and replanting that occurred 4 years ago. But absolutely things are going to change.
We spoke to Peter Clark from PF Olsen's the other day, and he was saying that he thought perhaps it's time for large tracts of forestry in that area to be retired. Are you saying the same thing?
Certainly time for silvicultural practices to be reviewed on the worst of the worst country. This National Environmental Standard has an erosion map underpinning it. It's called an erosion classification system. It's available online. Across all of New Zealand, about 7% of the land under plantation forests is red zoned. On the east coast, probably 40% of the land under plantations is red zoned, and that's because plantations were put on highly erodible country by the East Coast Forestry Scheme. Absolutely appropriate to review the silvicultural practices. It may be that on the worst of the worst country, completely different tree species might be planted on that. Just have to put in the New Zealand context, it's less than 10% of the total estate, but on the East Coast, it's probably 40% of the current estate. So a well-informed inquiry would be a very good thing to look at those issues, in my opinion.
That's the President of the Forest Owners Association, Peter Weir. You're with Checkpoint. Coming up, the police apologise and pay damages to journalist Nicky Hager after breaching his rights during an investigation into his book, Dirty Politics. Why the Department of Conservation withheld information due to be released in an Official Information Act request after consulting with security firm Thompson & Clark. And a Bay of Plenty councillor calls for a moratorium on granting water bottling consents. We always love to get your feedback back, so please text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Right now, though, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
US President Donald Trump says he's forged a good relationship with the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un at the end of an historic summit in Singapore, as the two men look for ways to end a nuclear standoff on the Korean peninsula. Emerging from the meeting, Donald Trump has told reporters he's very pleased with the discussions and is about to sign an unspecified agreement with Mr. Kim.
Really fantastic meeting. A lot of progress. Really very positive. I think better than anybody could have expected. Top of the line. Really good. We're going right now for a signing.
Donald Trump. People in the Gisborne region are bracing for another burst of heavy rain. Several state highways remain closed and power has been cut to more than 750 homes. Meanwhile, gale force winds have cut power to 1,200 properties in Taranaki. In Hawke's Bay, Civil Defence says it's keeping a close eye on rivers in the region, with another 80 to 100 millimetres of rain expected up till midnight tomorrow. It says river levels are rising and they're keeping a close watch on the Esk River and those around Wairoa. Meanwhile, flood-hit farmers in Tolaga Bay are considering legal action against forestry companies for the damage done to stock and properties by tons of flood-borne logging debris last week. 25 Auckland buildings, including parts of the hospital, stadiums and apartment blocks, have been found to have cladding similar to that in the Grenfell Tower in London, which was destroyed by fire a year ago. However, Auckland Council's General Manager of Building Consent says all the buildings are safe. The Manawatu Whanganui Regional Council has issued the Defence Force with an abatement notice saying it can no longer put water that contains firefighting foam which may contain toxins down stormwater drains. The Defence Force has to show the council what steps it's taking to comply with the ban next month. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much, Katrina. And we turn to business news now. And welcome back to Jonathan Mitchell. Jonathan, we've got a high-profile technology executive stepping down.
Good to be back, Rowan. Yes, Russell Stanners at Vodafone is leaving after more than a decade in the role. He leaves in October, and if we go through some of his disappointments and successes in that time, a main disappointment would be the failure to marry up with Sky Network Television. The regulator, the Commerce Commission, has been active of late in turning down other mergers as well. A notable one was Stuff and NZME, but that didn't stop Vodafone from pairing with Sky and launching their streaming and television service. A success would be Vodafone buying into fellow telco Team Talk, its rural services division, buying that for $10 million. That was a win on rival Spark, which had been chasing Team Talk but trying to buy all of Team Talk. So Vodafone won there. Jason Paris, who has quite an extensive TV, media and telecommunications CV, is stepping up into Russell Stanners' role. Mr Stanners himself, there's a lot of speculation going around that he'll replace John Follett at Sky Network Television when he retires after 27 years. So watch that one.
Yeah, Jonathan, the Federal Reserve in the United States meets this week and there's speculation that a rate rise is likely. And what's that likely to mean for us here in New Zealand?
Research company CoreLogic says first home buyers and borrowers generally shouldn't be concerned about rising interest rates in the United States. The Fed has been raising rates of late because the US economy is doing better and President Donald Trump's policies would lead to further stimulus in the US economy. But CoreLogic says our local banks aren't borrowing as much as they used to from overseas. They're looking closer to home and have enough in the kitty. Here's what CoreLogic's Calvin Davidson told us earlier.
A lot of mortgages in New Zealand are fixed. We've got about 80% of existing mortgages on fixed rates. You know, that gives people a buffer and time to prepare, and you know, it gives them a year or 2 years of insulation against any rises in market rates. And you hope, you know, in that time that steps can be taken to prepare for a possible rise at the end of that term.
And finally, Jono, how are those markets looking today?
We're monitoring events in Singapore with the Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un summit. We're expecting an announcement shortly between the two leaders going on CNN's coverage. But today our top 50 index fell just a point. We're still in the record zone at 8,959. And that Kiwi dollar 70.4 US cents, 92.4 Australian. Rowan.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. The journalist Nicky Hager has accepted an apology from police and the payment of damages after they breached his rights several times during an investigation into his book, Dirty Politics. In October 2014, police raided Mr Hager's house during an inquiry into the book's sources. The police were investigating a complaint laid by the blogger Cameron Slater, who said information from his computer obtained by a hacker known as Rorschach was published in Dirty Politics. In 2015, the High Court ruled the raid itself was illegal, but the police have since acknowledged that they acted unlawfully in other ways as well. Emma Hatton reports.
In the settlement announced today, police accepted they didn't have reasonable grounds for the search of Nicky Hager's home and that they unlawfully obtained his private information from third parties, including his bank. Mr Hager received an apology and an undisclosed payment amount for damages and legal fees. He says the apology is the most crucial part of the win.
From the very first day that the news came out of the raid, I was saying, I really want them to apologise. I want them to apologise. And the apology was the very last thing we got, basically. But the message goes out to the country. That's what's important. The message goes out to the country that they are saying it was wrong and we apologise. And that's good enough. That's perfectly good enough for me.
Nicky Hager's lawyer, Felix Geiringer, hopes the settlement sends a message that sources are safe to approach journalists.
This is a significant blow to opening up the channels again, letting people know that if they do get hold of a journalist and they do talk to a journalist, it's going to be very difficult and very rare for the police to be able to figure out who you are.
The police minister at the time of the raid, Anne Tolley, says she was never briefed on the operation. The current police minister, Stuart Nash, wasn't keen to say much about the move.
This is purely an issue between Mr Hager, the New Zealand Police Service and the courts. My understanding it's settled, my understanding it's a confidential settlement, and that's where it starts and it ends as far as I'm concerned.
And while Nicky Hager says he has no regrets over the almost 4-year battle to get the out-of-court settlement, he says at times it took its toll.
At the beginning, it was a bit bleak, that we weren't a happy family. It wasn't a happy house, particularly for my daughter who'd had to be here through the whole raid and had police going through her underwear drawer and all the things that happened. And then not too much later, she was being upset about finding that the police had been monitoring her telephone. Heaven help us.
Still outstanding for Mr Hager is a case lodged with the Human Rights Review Tribunal. Mr Hager's account information was handed over to police by Westpac Bank, despite police not obtaining a legal order to get the data. In February last year, the Privacy Commissioner determined Westpac had breached Mr Hager's privacy. Nicky Hager says other agencies, including PayPal and some airlines, gave out his information too, but it was a matter of picking which battles to fight. He says the tribunal is booked up until about 2055, but he'll hold out until his number's called. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
And now to a story about the security firm Thompson & Clark, the Department of Conservation, and the two organisations' incredibly close relationship when it comes to the Official Information Act. DOC uses Thompson & Clark to monitor and spy on 1080 protesters. We revealed last month the secret chat channels in the app Slack that Thompson & Clark used to communicate with DOC and several other government agencies. But DOC refused to release under the Official Information Act any documents sent through or any of the correspondence that took place in those secret chat channels. We complained to the Ombudsman here at Checkpoint, who is investigating. But now we can reveal, thanks to internal emails, that DOC was planning on releasing the information, but it changed its mind after Thompson & Clark Director Gavin Clark intervened and demanded it all be withheld. Zach Fleming has more.
The Department of Conservation uses security firm Thompson & Clark to spy on anti-1080 protesters. Information is shared through what Thompson & Clark calls its Fusion Centre, locked hidden chat rooms on a messaging app called Slack. Here's what the Department of Conservation said internally when I asked for its correspondence with Thompson & Clark.
Some, if not all, of the material in the Slack channel may need to be released under the OIA.
And here's what DOC ultimately released. Nothing. DOC didn't release anything from its Slack channels, no correspondence, no documents. Something changed drastically between that March 20 email from DOC's Director of Safety, Harry Marr.
Some, if not all, of the material in the Slack channel may need to be released under the OIA.
And exactly 1 month later, when DOC responded to my Official Information Act request without even mentioning Slack, let alone releasing material from it. Checkpoint complained to the Ombudsman, who is investigating, but thanks to internal emails, we now have an insight into what prompted DOC's turnaround. What changed, we've learned through reading these hundreds of emails, is that Thompson & Clark Director Gavin Clark demanded everything provided to DOC through Slack be withheld. He warned DOC that if that didn't happen, Thompson & Clark would probably stop providing its services. He then outlined parts of the law that DOC could use to withhold the information in full. And then DOC used his reasonings to withhold the information in full. In summary, DOC did exactly what Thompson & Clark wanted. Just over a month ago, the Ombudsman launched an investigation into DOC and whether it properly follows the Official Information Act. That's still ongoing, but Wellington lawyer and OIA advocate Graham Edgeler believes in this instance, by failing to even mention the existence of Slack, DOC hasn't.
Maybe they need to withhold almost everything that is shared on the Slack channel. I suspect that's not the case, but even if it is, they should be telling you it exists, and that's the big concern here.
What appears concerning too is the way the Department of Conservation leaned on Thompson & Clark in its decision-making. A private security firm whose bills have been paid by the taxpayer and whose spying has been deemed unacceptable by both former Prime Minister Helen Clark and current Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. In this instance with DOC, what Gavin Clark asked to be withheld was withheld. While Checkpoint received the OIA late, Gavin Clark received it on deadline, 3 days before us. Doc wasn't being as transparent as possible either. In one email, an employee asked,
"Let me know if you'd like to change the presentation. Perhaps hide the raw analysis."
And Doc failed to mention that a senior staffer who had extensive communications with Thompson and Clark lost all of his emails from 2017. We wanted to ask Doc about these things and other emails, which together could be interpreted as Doc withholding information at the request of Thompson and Clark. But nobody from Doc would be interviewed. Its communications team instead issued a very short statement saying that Doc carefully considered what to release under the Official Information Act and didn't want to comment while the Ombudsman is investigating. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
And the Thompson and Clark director Gavin Clark also declined to be interviewed. Checkpoint tried to talk to him in person, but Thompson and Clark isn't actually located at the company's listed address. Senior government ministers have refused to get drawn into a full-blown coalition dispute over the 3 strikes law, with both Labour and New Zealand First trying to shut the story down. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, was forced to shelve a cabinet paper repealing the controversial sentencing law after what he describes as a rethink by New Zealand First. Party leader and Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters says he's not going to get drawn into a spat over confidential coalition discussions. But he did say his party has had a consistent stance on 3 strikes, and that's to support it. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The 2010 law set up a system of increasing consequences for repeat serious violent offenders. On his way into caucus this morning, Andrew Little would not directly answer the question of whether New Zealand First had initially committed its support for the 3 strikes repeal, then changed its mind.
At any step of the way, anybody participating in it is entitled to say, no, had a bit of a rethink. New Zealand First said to me last week, they've had a rethink, they don't support the repeal of 3 strikes. That is their right to do that.
Andrew Little was then challenged on why he wouldn't answer the question directly.
They got to the position where they told me last week they did not support the
So
repeal of 3 strikes.
did you have a deal from Winston Peters then?
Originally.
You're leaving the impression that they've gone back on a pledge or a commitment that they initially gave you. Is that the impression you're happy to leave?
What is clear is that they came to me last week and said they are not prepared to support the repeal of 3 strikes for a variety of reasons.
Nationals Justice spokesperson Mark Mitchell was, however, prepared to give his view on what happened.
I think he was probably let down, and he was stabbed in the back and by New Zealand First, because I think that they fundamentally agreed to support him on it, and then they realised actually the campaign had stirred up some very strong public sentiment around it.
A view promptly dismissed by Winston Peters.
If you're going to repeat the language of a police dog handler, that's fine with me.
Well,
but that's not the standard we set in justice in the country.
So was he willing to throw any light on what had happened?
Look, I'm not going to analyse what happened here in terms of on what day and what hour conversations happened. A whole lot of conversations happened over a long period of time. It's how a sound coalition works, and I'm happy with the outcome.
You've just said that you've had a consistent, that your party's had a consistent.
Yeah, I know. I've just answered the question, and I'm not going to answer it again.
No, that's right. I'm asking, was there ever an alternative position communicated to Labour? Because Andrew Little says that you've had a rethink policy.
Well, look, I don't know what Andrew Little has said, and I'm not here to, bandy the words with you or anyone else.
Mr Peters says the final decision was made by New Zealand First at caucus.
You've all known that, and I've told you that from years and years upon years. And when caucus speaks, that's our official position. That's where things have always stood.
So he jumped the gun then by taking...
Well, look, you can come to that conclusion. No, please don't ask me to explain Mr Little's behaviour. It's not fair on him. It's not fair on me. Why don't you go and explain it? But I'm not going to get dragged into this sort of vortex of nothingness.
Nationals leader Simon Bridges also took aim at Mr Peters over another matter, his legal action against senior public servants and some former national ministers over the leak of his superannuation overpayment.
His very first act is to sue his own government and the most senior civil servant in the land. He should be focused on doing a good job for New Zealanders, not on his own personal vendettas.
Another topic Mr Peters was unwilling to discuss.
You're infringing the sub judice rule now. If you want to have it in front of the court, carry on. But you're not going to, or any of you, be allowed the licence to breach the sub judice rule. That's not how our justice system works.
Is it appropriate for an acting Prime Minister to be taking legal action against...
Look, you're breaching the sub judice rule as you speak. And I'm not going to...
Alongside the debate about 3 strikes, there's also been plenty of discussion about how to improve rehabilitation rates and lower the prison muster. The previous national government had planned a 3,000-bed mega prison at Waikeria. This government won't proceed with that, but will announce its plan tomorrow afternoon. A criminal justice summit will be held in August, after which Andrew Little will start work on a broader package of reforms, including changes to bail and parole laws. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The man who abducted a young woman on a central suburban street in daylight has narrowly avoided a jail sentence without end. Today, Tanga David Kepa Adams was sentenced to 6 years and 5 months in prison with a minimum non-parole period of 3 years and 10 months. Our reporter Edward Gay filed this report.
Justice Fata said Adams was driving in the Auckland suburb of Eden Terrace in February last year when he spotted a woman walking by herself. He pulled over and got out of his car, waiting for the woman to pass him before putting her in a headlock.
You then dragged her a short distance to your car. You opened the passenger side door of the car and pushed her head first into the footwell of the front passenger seat. She screamed, and in response, you choked her to stop her screaming.
When Adams released his grip, the woman screamed again, and this time he used his thumbs to gouge her eyes to stop her screaming.
At this point, the victim said to you, quote, "Please don't kill me," close quotes. You continued to drive on. You had driven less than a kilometre when the victim grabbed the door handle and opened it as the car was underway.
In a subsequent interview with police, he said he had intended to rape the woman. 2 hours after the abduction, Adams broke into a woman's home and stole 4 pairs of her underwear. At the time, he was on parole, having served a lengthy prison sentence for breaking into a home and beating the women who lived there. The Crown Prosecutor Fiona Kalani argued Adams was a candidate for preventive detention because his offending had escalated over time and he had only been out of prison 3 months when he carried out the abduction. However, Justice Fata had concerns.
But we have an 80% recidivism rate in New Zealand after 5 years.
Yes, Your Honour.
If I was to adopt that as a benchmark for preventive detention, we'd be having the vast majority of prisoners under preventative detention.
Ms Kalani said it was fortuitous Adams wasn't facing more serious charges.
It was the victim's actions of opening the car door and rolling out that prevented any further action by the defendant. Yes, I accept that that reduces the seriousness of the charge that he faces, but not the risk that he faces to the community.
But Justice Fata was not convinced preventive detention was the answer.
I mean, preventive detention is the most onerous sentence that we have on the books, apart from the application of the 3 strikes law. So it's not meant to attach to just any risk profile. It's meant to attach to those prisoners that are most clearly high risk to the community.
The judge also asked Adams' lawyer, Jane Frances O'Halloran, about psychiatric reports that concluded Adams posed a high risk of reoffending.
I've not seen 2 psychiatrists' or reports as negative as this previously. And, need to say I've come across some pretty bad offending.
He said it was a big call for a judge to then give Adams a chance to prove himself. Miss O'Halloran acknowledged Adams posed a high risk now, but would undergo rehabilitation treatment inside prison, and he was ready for that. She said he was 32 years old and was sorry for what he had done. In sentencing Adams, Justice Fata noted that he had a childhood marred by alcohol and drug abuse, and he had associated with gangs. He'd also racked up numerous convictions for stabbings, thefts, assault and assault on police officers. But the judge stepped back from imposing preventive detention.
I consider that it is too premature to conclude that you present an unmanageable risk of reoffending. 2 factors in particular drive this conclusion. Your violent offending, while revealing a pattern, does not reveal a repeated pattern of sexual offending. Secondly, you have not benefited from a treatment plan specifically directed to your needs.
He said he was satisfied a lengthy prison sentence with a minimum non-parole period and the possibility of supervision conditions on release would protect the public. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Edward Gay ahau.
The government's new top scientist wants to help young people get to grips with the world of science by harnessing the power of social media. Auckland University Professor Juliet Gerard has been named as the Prime Minister's new Chief Science Advisor. She replaces Sir Peter Gluckman, the first government-appointed Chief Advisor, who served in the role for almost a decade.
Professor Juliet Gerard trained at Oxford University before moving to New Zealand 21 years ago to work as a scientist at crop and food research. She moved to Canterbury University in the late 1990s and worked as a lecturer and a director before moving north to Auckland University in 2014. Professor Gerard says she's absolutely thrilled about her new role and wants to put particular emphasis on using social media to make science more accessible.
Working alongside all the quite dry academic reports to do another release to the public to just explain not just the conclusion but also the essence of the debate that got us there.
Juliet Gerard's areas of interest cover biochemistry, health agriculture, food science and medical equipment design. As well as being the second Chief Science Advisor, she is also the first woman to take up the position.
The times are changing and we have as many babies as beards. So I hope my appointment will go some way towards encouraging ambition in young female scientists. And it's true that for a long time women were quietly advised to choose between a science career or children, and that's no longer true. And girls, if you decide to change career paths, then I don't think you have to choose between ambition and babies in politics either.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, who is now basing herself in Auckland ahead of the birth of her first child, says she's blown away by Professor Gerard's achievements and experience.
She is, of course, first and foremost a scientist. But while Sir Peter was the first man to take on the role, Juliet is the first woman now to take on the role, and in an area where we can only hope to lift the amount of young women and girls entering into the sciences, you will have that additional role of playing role model, and so I'm grateful for that too.
Ms Ardern also thanked outgoing advisor Sir Peter Gluckman, who was appointed in 2009 to provide former Prime Minister Sir John Key with a direct line to scientific advice. During his time in the role, Sir Peter has pushed for the drinking age to be raised and more recently debunked the meth testing guidelines for houses, finding that there's never been a documented case of someone getting sick from third-hand exposure to meth smoke. Sir Peter says he'll be leaving the role in good hands at the end of this month.
Trusted scientific advice can and will make for a better New Zealand, and a better New Zealand within a better world is the key issue. And I think that with Juliet, with the science advisory system, and with a government that remains committed to reinforcing that system, we're in good shape.
Professor Gerard says she plans to connect with the Department's Science Advisor Network and visit scientists around the country over the next few weeks, before taking up her new job on July the 1st. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Scott-Chatene.
Hospital buildings, 2 stadiums and apartment blocks have been found in Auckland with similar cladding to that which caused the fatal Grenfell Tower fire in London. Tom Furley reports.
The council today named 25 buildings with cladding of the type that burned on the Grenfell Tower in London, causing the deaths of 72 people. These are among a list of at least 122 buildings with some type of aluminium composite panel on them. The council's Building Consents Manager Ian McCormick told a media conference this afternoon that his specialist team had found they're all safe.
Whilst in a limited number of cases the presence of ACPP material in the current context configuration may elevate the risk of vertical fire spread to some degree, we still consider in all instances that it is low risk. It's important to understand it does not make the building dangerous.
The council released the information in response to an RNZ Official Information Act request. 7 buildings at Auckland Hospital are on the list, and some have the highly combustible PE panel on them, as do Waitakere Stadium and the AUT Millennium Sports Complex. In another 53 buildings, the council has not established for certain what type of panel, called ACP, has been used. These include the Sky City Convention Centre and Hotel and at least 4 apartment blocks. Mr McCormick says in all those cases it's assuming that the most combustible out of the 3 kinds of panel, called PE because it has polyethylene core, has been used.
We've ensured that building owners are aware of the presence of ACP cladding on their buildings so they're able to make informed decisions. In many cases, we would consider there's absolutely no reason to make any changes. In others, insurers may want to validate any perceived increase in vertical fire spread and build it into their premiums.
The council has also taken into account if the cladding is on top of combustible insulation, and where it does not know, it has taken a worst-case scenario approach to that too. Ian McCormick says they've also assessed the danger of fires spreading from the aluminium panel-clad buildings to others nearby, and of burning panel debris falling off onto firefighters or people escaping. Fire safety systems such as sprinklers lessen the risk, as do some buildings having only a limited amount of combustible panel on them or a limited exposure to an ignition source. The Principal Advisor on Fire Risk from Fire and Emergency, Mike Shaw, says residents and building owners should be comfortable the cladding is safe.
They should have confidence in the building systems that they have in place in their buildings. We've looked at all of the buildings. We have history with all of those buildings, as in we've had contact with them before, and we're comfortable that the systems inside the building, if they manage their building the way that they should, they keep their exit ways clear, and this is the same advice we give to every building owner, basically. I don't see that they're under any special danger.
In a statement, the Chief Financial Officer of Auckland District Health Board, Rosalie Percival, says there is no risk with its buildings.
It is important to understand that the ACP cladding used in Auckland DHB buildings is not the same as the material used in Grenfell Tower. The way our buildings are constructed and the sprinkler systems and other fire safety measures that are in place ensure the buildings are of an acceptable safety standard.
The council believes it's identified nearly all the buildings in the city more than 25 metres high with the panels, and most of those over 10 metres high. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten tēnei. The US President Donald Trump and the Korean leader Kim Jong-un have signed a document at the end of their much-anticipated summit in Singapore. It's not known what's in the document, but Mr. Trump described it as historic and comprehensive. Mr. Trump has told reporters the two leaders are very proud of what has happened today. He said the whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula will be very different. For his part, Mr. Kim has said through a translator, "We've decided to leave the past behind and the world will see major changes." The content of the agreement is expected to be released later this evening. The coalition government is in damage control over its three strikes shambles, with both sides refusing to answer specific questions about the dispute. The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, has ditched his plans to repeal the law, saying he no longer has the support to do so as New Zealand First has changed its mind. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
Andrew Little this morning repeatedly refused to answer questions about what commitments, if any, New Zealand First had given about repealing the three strikes law. That law sets out increasing consequences for repeat serious violent offenders. He would only say the coalition partner had had a rethink, as is its right. For his part, New Zealand First's leader Winston Peters said his party has only ever had one position, but he declined to comment about previous conversations with Mr Little, saying he backs the Justice Minister and won't be drawn into a petty spat. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
The Environment Manager for a Gisborne Forestry company says he didn't know residents are asking the industry for compensation. 36 farms in the Tolaga Bay area have been damaged by flooding in the past week and want the logging companies to put up $100 million to clean up the mess. They also want a halt to all logging activity and a government inquiry into the industry. But Peter Weir, who's also the president of the Forest Owners Association, told Checkpoint that request is news to him.
Well, this is the first I've heard of that. Our company is the one has committed to make 2 excavators available for as long as it takes to do the clean-up. But as I say, we have to wait for the sun to come out and the paddocks to dry out a bit before we can do that.
Peter Weir. And the Civil Defence Minister Chris Varfoy says a clean-up for parts of the East Coast hit twice by torrential rain. It could take months. Mr Varfoy was shown around the region today. He says about 40 roads are closed and the clean-up is going to be particularly difficult for farmers and growers. Gisborne Civil Defence says the bad weather is easing in the Sodden region and rivers seem to have peaked. Crews are out trying to repair roads, inspect bridges and get power back on. A number of state highways remain closed because of the bad weather. State Highway 2 between Gisborne and Opotiki at Teikaraka and State Highway 5 between Napier and Taupō. In the South Island, State Highway 1 is closed north and south of Kaikoura. A community group in Wellington says elder abuse is being exacerbated by meth addiction. The Elder Abuse Response Service is run by Wesley Community Action. The manager of the elder care team, Claire Booth, says many older people are being hassled for money by their pee-addicted children. She says there are cases where an adult child will wrest money off their parents to pay for their habit.
Or take over the house, or try and manufacture methamphetamine in a garage, or frog march their parents down to the ATM and stand over them while they get money out. You know, that kind of gamut of behaviour.
Claire Booth says Wesley Community Action has had the elder abuse contract only since August last year, so it's not clear if the problem is getting worse. An Auckland University professor, Juliet Gerard, has been named as the Prime Minister's new Chief Science Advisor. She replaces Sir Peter Gluckman, who's been in the role for almost a decade. Professor Gerard's areas of interest cover biochemistry, health agriculture, food science and medical equipment design. She hopes to promote science to young people, especially young women.
The times are changing and we have as many babies as beards. So I hope my appointment will go some way towards encouraging ambition in young female scientists. And it's true that for a long time women were quietly advised to choose between a science career or children, and that's no longer true.
Juliet Gerard says she aims to help young people get to grips with the world of science by using social media. It's 6:05. Sport. The Football Ferns coach Andreas Herev says he hasn't spoken to Abby Urseg after the former captain said her decision to retire from the team for a second time was a result of his tactical approach. Herev is under fire for his comments after the team's 3-1 loss to Japan in Wellington on Sunday, where, among other things, he said they would never have the quality to compete with such world-class opposition. Urseg has called him delusional and the reason she's no longer playing for New Zealand. The Austrian has moved to try to clarify some of his comments and also responded to Abby Urseg.
She hasn't spoken to me. She's a fantastic football player, but she made a decision not to play anymore for New Zealand, and we have to accept that. And if now the decision is because she doesn't like my style, I don't know why she retired the first time. And if she retired the second time because of me or because how we want to play, then it is her decision.
Football Ferns coach Andreas Herev. American Deontay Wilder has agreed terms to fight Anthony Joshua in Britain later this year in a bout that would crown the first undisputed heavyweight champion in almost 20 years. The WBC title is the only one remaining on Joshua's radar after he added the WBO championship to his collection by defeating New Zealand's previously unbeaten Joshua Parker in March by unanimous decision. And next year's Super Rugby competition won't have a break for June internationals and will end a month earlier than normal because of the World Cup. The final will be on July the 6th. The World Cup starts in Japan on September the 20th. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Nick Bollinger samples the latest from Kanye West, Donald Trump's biggest hip-hop fan. We have a window on the world of migrants trying to escape Europe. And I don't mean Brexit. And this week's after-dinner speaker, our mathematician Dylan Mayhew, explains why you only need 4 colours to fill out a map of the United States correctly. Does that mean he's a Trump supporter too?
And stay informed at the other end of the day. Join me for Lately, an hour-long show that includes the extended 10 p.m. news bulletin and is across music, the arts, politics, live events and current affairs. Keep up to date with Lately with Karen Hay, 10 to 11 weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow, and severe weather is affecting many areas. Keep an eye on current watches and warnings. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel, occasional showers easing this evening. Bay of Plenty, rain with heavy falls, easing to showers tonight, severe gales until evening. Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including the central high country, periods of rain, possibly heavy, easing tomorrow evening. Southeast winds, severe gale in exposed places, easing this evening. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington and Marlborough, rain with heavy falls, easing north of Wairarapa this evening and elsewhere late tomorrow. Southeast winds, gale in exposed places, easing tonight. Canterbury, occasional rain or drizzle. Nelson and Buller, occasional rain, clearing tomorrow. Southeast winds, gale in exposed places, easing tonight. For Westland and Fiordland, fine with high cloud. Otago and Southland areas of cloud, drizzle about North Otago, spreading to Dunedin and Clutha tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy with rain developing tomorrow. It's exactly 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. I'm Rowan Quinn in tonight for John Campbell. History has been made in Singapore today. Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un have become the first sitting leaders of the US and North Korea to meet in person, an unprecedented development after a year of exchanging threats. Mr. Trump says today's summit at a luxury hotel in Singapore's Sentosa Island had gone better than anyone could have expected. And in a twist worthy of reality television, the two leaders concluded their meeting with an unscheduled signing. The agreement, according to Mr. Trump, deals with a very dangerous problem for the world.
We've had a really great term together, a great relationship. I'll be giving a news conference at 2:30, which is in a little bit less than 2 hours, and we'll discuss this at great length. In the meantime, I believe that they'll be handing it out on behalf of Chairman Kim and myself, and we're both very honored to sign the document. Thank you.
We had a historic meeting and decided to leave the past behind, and we are about to sign a historic document.
세상은 아마 중대한 변화를 보게 될 것입니다.
The world will see a major change.
오늘과 같은 이런 자리를 위해서 노력해 주신 트럼프 대통령께 사의를 표합니다.
I would like to express my gratitude to President Trump to make this meeting happen.
감사합니다.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we're very proud of what took place today. I think our whole relationship with North Korea and the Korean Peninsula is it's going to be a very much different situation than it has in the past. We both want to do something. We both are going to do something. And we have developed a very special bond. So people are going to be very impressed. People are going to be very happy. And we're going to take care of a very big and very dangerous problem for the world. And I want to thank Chairman Kim. Spent a lot of time together today, very intensive time. And I would actually say that it worked out for both of us far better than anybody could have expected. I think far better. I watched the various news reports. I would say far better than anybody even predicted. And this is going to lead to more and more and more. And it's an honor to be with you. Very great honor. Thank you. Thank you to all of your representatives very much.
Well, Anna Fifield is in Singapore covering the summit for the Washington Post, and she joins us now via Skype video. Hi, Anna. Well, do we know anything yet about what is in this unexpected document?
Well, basically no. I mean, but we do know that there were actually 3 documents that were signed today. President Trump described them as 3 comprehensive documents. We don't know what exactly they cover. As you heard on the tape there, he said he will announce them. It's about 20 minutes now before they'll release the text of that. But all of the signs throughout the day, you know, from the moment they both arrived in the morning were very positive. Kim Jong-un actually said in English, "Nice to meet you, Mr. President." So really, you know, made this gesture and this effort to get it off on the right start. So really astonishing scenes here today.
Yeah, can you sort of take us through how the day unfolded?
Right, they both arrived in their motorcades shortly around 9 o'clock this morning. Kim Jong-un arrived first, apparently as a sign of deference to President Trump, that he wanted to be the first one to arrive. And then they had a photo opportunity in front of the flags of the 2 countries. Quite smiley from Kim Jong-un, not so smiley from President Trump. And then they went into a meeting of about 40 minutes long, just them and their translators, and sat down to meet first of all. We didn't see them again until it was time for lunch, and their delegations, they all sat around the same table together and, you know, literally broke bread together before President Trump and Mr. Kim went out for a walk around their hotel together. It was only a couple of minutes, but that they did without their translators. So just the optics of it, seeing these 2 leaders whose countries have been, you know, enemies for 70 years, taking a stroll in the Singapore sunshine was really remarkable.
Yeah, they really did seem to have a good rapport. You know, there was a long handshake and touching of each other's arms. Are we reading very much into that at this stage?
Yeah, well, obviously the body language experts have been analysing everything, you know, who's trying to be the alpha male here and who's not. So, but certainly the atmospherics and the optics were very good. Now we just need to wait and see what the substance of today was. And it looks like both of them will be able to leave and go home, you know, crowing of a victory this afternoon.
Yeah, and it looked like at one stage that Donald Trump had possibly shown his car off to Mr. Kim.
Yeah, apparently he said it's called the Beast, the you know, president's limousine, and he invited Kim Jong-un to take a look inside. Apparently, we don't know why. I'm sure that caused a lot of concern for the security people. But watching the live feed at the time, it looked like they were about to both hop in the car together and go somewhere. So it was very surprising, and that it seemed to be quite spontaneous. We saw them huddling outside one of the rooms for a while, seeming to decide what to do. So in terms of like the usual choreography of this kind of summit, today seemed to be much more going with the flow.
Yeah, just looking from the outside, do you think that both leaders will think they've had a win from today's talks?
Yeah, definitely. I think they both can claim a win here. Like President Trump is calling this historic, that they've been able to do something that, you know, administrations before his have not. Kim Jong-un as well has made history by coming, you know, this far, by becoming the first North Korean leader to meet with an American president. So, I mean, either way, they can sell this to their people. I mean, it's just extraordinary to see the front page of the North Korean main newspaper this morning had all of these photos of Kim Jong-un out there walking around in Singapore, like around these incredible architectural buildings and walking along the esplanade, and people stopping to take photos of him. So it's really been able, Kim Jong-un, to achieve his goal of looking like a responsible global leader.
Thanks very much for all of that, Anna. That is Anna Fifield speaking to us there from Singapore. A Hamilton dentist has described New Zealanders as having third world dental problems and has started a petition calling on the government to subsidise visits. Aseel Russell, who co-founded the charity dental service Revive a Smile, says she's seen patients who've resorted to pulling out their own teeth because they can't afford a trip to the dentist. She told me she plans to take the petition to Parliament later this year, calling for the dental visits to be subsidised just like the doctor's visits.
The idea is that people who, for example, have a community services card, who are low to mid-income, people who are in the elderly group, the youth, so people who are not yet in employment, maybe people who are at varsity. So those are the types of people that would be benefiting from a subsidised dental care. Obviously, I mean, in the ideal world, it would be free for everyone, but realistically, we know that that's a big ask. So asking for a subsidy for at-need groups is a concrete step in the right direction.
What are some of the things that you see in your work as a result of people not getting proper dental treatment?
So we're really seeing quite severe infections in some of the cases that are coming through the charity clinics. So people that have left it for a long time, so that, you know, may have had a toothache and just ignored it, and then the problem progressed over time. So, you know, it affects their own general health as well. So we're seeing people who are coming in with a lot of pain. Sometimes people have tried to seek help, but you know, the wind grants weren't sufficient or something like that, and so they didn't end up getting it in the end. Yeah, so we've been working closely with the Southern Cross Health Trust, and they've helped to sponsor us and make our work possible. And we've been travelling around New Zealand providing free care for these sorts of people. Yeah.
Is it a situation where if you were able to afford to pay for sort of the early dental problems, then you wouldn't have these sort of horrific bills that come with a nasty dental problem?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we strongly advocate for people to go in regularly, and I think that's an issue in New Zealand, that people aren't seeking their regular checkups. They just go when there's a problem. So if people go quite regularly, it's not that costly to go in for a checkup and x-rays, but it is quite costly to go in when there's major work that needs to be done.
Which groups or which age groups are you seeing most affected by these problems?
Look, it's honestly across board. So, we're seeing people who have gone to varsity and it stopped being free at the age of 18, and they aren't able to go and access care when they need it, so they leave it and they come to us in their 20s with major issues. We see a lot of the elderly communities that can't afford to go to see a dentist, so they're leaving it as well, and they come in with major problems. And adults of all ages. So it's really not specific to one certain age group. It's across board and across communities as well. So with our clinics, we've travelled from the far north and all across the North Island, and the problems we're seeing in the far north are similar to the ones we see in West Auckland and in the Waikato. So it's not generally specific to a particular age group or to a particular area as well.
Have you seen any cases or know of any cases of people pulling out their own teeth?
Yep, absolutely. So we've had quite a few cases that come through our charity clinic with people that have tried to give it a go themselves and do a bit of DIY dentistry, and it never ends well, and we strongly don't recommend that anyone does do that. It's a very dangerous thing to do, and especially with the use of unsterile equipment. There's a lot of blood vessels and things in the mouth that, if they're nicked, can cause some major issues. So it's really sad that this sort of thing is happening in New Zealand, but it definitely is, and it's time that something is done about it. And New Zealanders should have the right to access qualified dentists, and one way to make that more affordable is to subsidise dentistry for at-need adults.
What advice do you have for people who can't afford to go to the dentist?
So one thing, of course, is to apply through the Revive a Smile charity clinics. There's a simple application process that they can do through the website, which is nzdentalcharity.org. And a lot of our work is made possible with thanks to Southern Cross Health Trust and other community grants. If they can't access us or would like to see their own dentist, I think just talk to your dentist as well. There's a big misconception in New Zealand that dentists are greedy people. They're really not. The reason dentistry is expensive is because of the high costs associated with running a practice. And I know many clinics that offer payment plans and payment options for people if the work that's needed is quite major. So definitely don't leave it if you're suffering from any sort of toothache. It's not going to go away, so it's going to get worse over time. So seek help, whether it's through us or through your local practices.
How does New Zealand compare to the rest of the developed world when it comes to affordable access to dental care?
Look, I mean, I'm no expert in what's going on overseas, but what I do know is that we're not seeing first world problems here. We're seeing quite third world issues when it comes to dental problems. And in some areas overseas, the dentistry is subsidized, so people can go to the dentist, and they're only paying a fraction of the cost of what the appointment would actually cost. And in New Zealand, doctors' visits are subsidized, so it doesn't make sense that we're putting dentistry on a lower priority, whereas in fact it should be right up there with general health. So you go to the doctor and you only pay a very small amount compared to what the actual cost of the appointment is. And the running of a medical practice has as much overhead costs as a dentist practice, and probably dentists have more overhead costs. So I think, it's good to look at overseas models that work as well, but I think definitely in New Zealand we need to consider seriously subsidising it for the at-need communities here.
And that's Hamilton dentist Asil Russell. A Bay of Plenty councillors calling for a moratorium on granting water bottling consents until the issue of water ownership is sorted. It follows the government's announcement today to grant overseas investment consent to a controversial water bottling plant in Otakari near Whakatane. Creswell New Zealand says it will provide 60 new jobs, but there are questions over the true value of the plant's expansion to the local economy. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton has more.
Whakatane District Councillor Mike Vanderboom lives near the current site of the Otakiri Springs water bottling plant. He says the government's decision to grant consent to Creswell New Zealand to expand the plant shows it's not serious about confronting the issue of water ownership. Water ownership is an issue that has been widely debated in recent years and has been the focus of claims before the Waitangi Tribunal. Mr Vanderboom is proposing a moratorium on granting consents until there's further clarity on the topic.
Any sales, international sales of these water rights should be put on hold until there's a real moratorium and we start the discussion on who owns the water.
Mike Vanderboom also questions whether 60 jobs will be created by the expansion of the water bottling plant and the amount of money that will be pumped into the local economy.
When you look at that $6, $7, $8 million worth of economic benefit, what is that really? It's muskets and blankets. It's pitiful, really.
He says locals he's spoken to are feeling defeated about the issue.
They've given up, really. They just think, it's going to happen. And obviously they're not keen on having their lifestyles changed by this new water bottling plant, and, I can understand that.
Creswell New Zealand is owned by Nongfu Spring Co Limited, a Chinese bottled water supplier which wants to complete a $42.5 million expansion at the current water bottling plant. They want to take up to 5,000 cubic metres of groundwater per day, or almost 1.1 million cubic metres per year, for the commercial bottling of water. The Minister of Land Information, Eugenie Sage, says the decision to grant the consent to buy land was guided by the provisions of the Overseas Investment Act.
It does have substantial economic benefits, the provision of 60 new jobs in the Whakatane area, and we've gone beyond what's normally done in terms of the way conditions are provided.
The consent will allow the company to buy around 6.2 hectares of land at Otakiri, near Whakatane. Minister Sage wouldn't say whether this decision would pave the way for other water bottling plants, such as the proposed water bottling plant in Murupara being issued consent.
It depends on a case-by-case basis and the recommendation of the Overseas Investment Office. In this case, in these circumstances, with this number of jobs and this investment, was to grant the application to buy the land.
Whakatane District Council Mayor Tony Bond believes the expansion of the water bottling plant is a positive for the local economy. But he says it's been a divisive issue for the community.
It's been a sensitive issue throughout the whole of New Zealand. I think everybody, when you talk to them, has got an opinion of water, and I think water is something that we treat as something sacred to New Zealand. And we just want to make sure that the future of New Zealand's water supplies are not at risk, and I think that's where people come from.
Mr Bond says water bottling is a clean industry and local aquifers won't be greatly impacted by the expansion of the plant. Creswell New Zealand will now need to gain water permits and resource consent from the Whakatane District Council and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
And the Creswell Managing Director, Michael Gleisner, says the consent is great news for the Kawero, Whakatane and Te Teko communities. If resource consent is provided, Mr Gleisner says the company will prioritise hiring locals who will be given on-the-job training to raise their employment skills. Otakiri Springs currently employs 8 full-time staff. A rescue vessel with 600 African migrants on board is now heading east across the Mediterranean after Spain offered to take them in. The offer to take the migrants on the Aquarius comes after Italy and then Malta refused to allow the ship to dock. The new Italian government is hailing it as a victory, saying nowhere is it written that all migrants should land in Italy forever. With more, here's the BBC's James Reynolds.
No, Peter, I've got a visual on them.
The Aquarius sailed into the Mediterranean as normal on Saturday in order to save lives. Italian naval officials directed it towards migrants struggling to stay afloat off the coast of Libya.
I need more life jackets. Take them off, people, if you must. Let's go.
This was not an easy rescue.
Hold up. We need starboard side recovery right now.
But in the end, everyone was saved.
One by one, guys. One after the other, one after the other. You, in the rock. Go, 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 in the rock. Let's go.
The Aquarius then headed north, expecting to dock at a port here in Sicily. But Italy's new government said no. It no longer wants to take in the people it helps to save. Nearby Malta also closed its ports. The rescue ship was suddenly stuck at sea with hundreds of vulnerable passengers on board.
We have over 100 children on board, and small babies as well, and multiple women, including seven pregnant women. The situation will become more and more difficult on board. Our capacity is normally 500 people. We're now at 629.
The sights of endless waves of migrants making it to Italy angered many in this country. The populists won power by promising to solve the problem. 10 days after taking office, they've won a first victory.
The problem has been solved thanks to the generosity of the Spanish government. Clearly the EU can't go on this way. Today is a new beginning.
Spain's intervention may solve the crisis on the Aquarius, but what happens when the next set of people sets off towards Italy?
And that was James Reynolds reporting there from Rome. Well, we've got time for a bit of feedback now. We've had quite a lot coming in on our story about farmers in the flood-hit Tolaga Bay. They're considering legal action against the forestry companies for the damage done to their stock and property by runaway slash. That's all the logs and debris that came down in the flooding there earlier this week. One texter says, 2 important points on Tolaga Bay. The first is this is entirely predictable. Forestry's a nightmare for erodible coastland and on the east coast, and in combination with climate change, which is here folks, more extreme rain events are here to stay for the east coast. And their second point is that it's incredibly ironic that farmers want a payout from forestry for doing damage to their properties downstream. Will the farming community pay to clean the damage they've done to our freshwater resources? Let's join the dots here. This texter says land use in New Zealand must change and forestry isn't the silver bullet. And that is it for Checkpoint tonight. Thanks for joining us however you chose to, whether it was on your radio, your TV, online. You can catch up with all our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. And so from me, Rowan Quinn, and all of the fabulous Checkpoint team, have a lovely night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The US President says he expects the denuclearisation of the Korean Peninsula to start very, very quickly after his historic summit with the North Korean leader. The coalition government is in damage control over its reversal of a plan to repeal the 3 strikes law, with Winston Peters and Andrew Little both refusing to answer specific questions. A manager at a Gisborne forestry company says he didn't know local people want the industry to compensate them for flood damage from logging material. State Highway 5 between Napier and Taupō remains closed, but State Highway 2 at Te Karaka between Gisborne and Opotiki has now reopened. In the South Island, State Highway 1 is closed north and south of Kaikoura. Our next news and weather is at 7.
In Eyewitness, it's 1979 and a diplomatic scandal rocks the country.
The Soviet ambassador is being expelled.